I thought I was that side. I'm sorry. Okay.
Only one side.
Yeah. Okay. Right. There we go. Forgotten which side I was. Right. That's not right, is it? Welcome to the Cheltenham Borough Council Audit, Compliance and Governance Committee meeting being held today, Wednesday, the 28th of May. My name is Councillor Adrian Bamford and I'm the chair of the committee. This meeting is being recorded by the council for live broadcast on its YouTube channel. If there are any breaks in transmission to the YouTube stream, the meeting will be adjourned for a short period until the issue. A fire alarm test is not expected, so if the alarm does sound, please make your way to the nearest fire exit. Can I ask everyone to speak clearly when addressing the meeting and that officers introduce themselves when they speak? Item 1, apologies. We have Councillor Orme and also Duncan Chittenden, who I think is our new independent member. Yeah, I haven't actually met him yet, but hopefully for the next meeting. Councillor Davis is Ashley has not apologised or was apologising, but she's now here with us. I'll let you take your seat. All good? Any declarations of interest? Julian, Councillor Took.
I probably should declare that I'm chair of the Cabinet Housing Committee because there's some overlap in gender items.
Actually, you might be able to help us then, some of the issues coming up. So, moving on to minutes of the last meeting. Are there any amendments to the draft minutes that anybody would like to propose, or are you happy for me to sign them as they are drafted? I see no hands, so I will sign them accordingly. I did note that we talked about the fact that we hadn't got a clear value of the airport. Well, I think we may be moving closer on that one. So, right. Okay, let's sign there. Do you want me to pass these over to you, Judy? Judy signed?
I'll be the glamorous assistant.
Thank you. Right. There we go. Could we have a show of hands for accepting those minutes then, please? All in favour? Thank you. I don't think there are any public or member questions. There's something that I'm aware of. So we'll move on to item number 5, which is the external audit plan. Nathan, do you want to introduce that for me? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is our second external audit plan for the council, and I will take you through some of the key points in there, and obviously I'm happy to take any questions as we go through at the end. The key point of this document is to set out our proposed approach for this year's external audit, just to set the context that actually the scope of what we're required to do has not changed since the prior years. It's to give a true and fair view in the financial statements for the council and of the council's group as a whole. And when we talk about the group, we're talking there about also the subsidiary Cheltenham Borough Homes Limited, where we are also the external auditors. So obtain assurance over those numbers through that process. And we also talk about that we bring into the consolidated accounts our share of the assets, liabilities and profits and losses of Gloucestershire Airport Limited as well. So as the Chair just mentioned there, that the bit that's material to our consolidated group accounts is the balance sheet side of that. And that needs to reflect actually the recoverability of your investment in the airport. So that kind of ongoing discussions about what that's worth and what's recoverable will feed into that kind of value that comes to your group accounts there as well, and our audit work over that. In terms of the key points I wanted to pull out, our materiality approach is important just to discuss with you. That is unchanged from previous years and your previous auditor's approach as well, and that we base it on a percentage of expenditure in the financial statements, and that's based at a high level of 2% of overall expenditure. That's the level that we would need to make sure that there's no adjustments unadjusted there over that threshold. Otherwise, we'd have to be amending our audit opinion. We complete our work to a much lower level, but that's kind of the cumulative level of any areas that we'd be concerned about. And that equates to broadly about 1.8, 1.9 million pounds for the council. In terms of the risk areas, these are very similar to the prior year. Some of these are prescribed by auditing standards. So in particular, management override of controls, which is prescribed by auditing standards to be a significant risk for all audits. And by that means anything in terms of significant estimates and judgments that are being made in pulling together the financial statements. And also anything where management can bypass control environments in place. So in particular there we do work over journals that are processed directly into the finance system. And you'll probably remember some of the outputs from that into our report last year. So we'll be following a similar process to that as previous years. The most significant estimates are actually the ones then that we've pulled out into separate significant risk areas. And they're around valuations. So there's the valuation of land and buildings, the valuation of investment properties, and the valuation of your heritage assets that sit on the balance sheet. They're all significant balances. All of them are, our approach is fairly similar in that actually you get a valuation support to give you as a management's expert, to give you a value that goes into the financial statements. We then use our own experts and support in terms of the assumptions that have been used by your experts in terms of things like yield rates, market valuations, etc., to make sure that we're comfortable with that they're materially accurate. The other part of that is actually making sure that we understand the inputs that have been used there as well. So making sure, for example, the square footage of the sites that's been put into the calculation are accurate and correct as well on a sample basis. And we speak to your valuers through that process to understand any judgments and estimates they've made as well to make sure they all sound reasonable and appropriate. So that addresses those kind of three significant risks together there. The other one, again, is the other significant risk is also linked to valuations, and that's around the valuation of your pension scheme. So there's two elements of that there. One, but the biggest piece of work is actually around the liabilities there. So there's a number of assumptions that go into calculating your share of the scheme's liabilities overall, and that's including things like discount rates, mortality assumptions. The actuary will calculate your share of that for you. We use again our own experts to assess the reasonableness of the assumptions used by the actuary for the year end, and make sure again that it's been calculated appropriately and put through the accounts correctly into the financial statements. Again, that's similar to previous years. We didn't have any concerns or issues over that work last year. The risk that is new that we've had over the page is around the implementation of a new accounting standards. That's IFRS 16. That's been on the agenda and the horizon for a number of years for local authorities. And this has been essentially resulting in you having to recognise longer term lease commitments that would previously recognised as a sort of operating lease onto your balance sheet. And you recognise it as a right of use asset and a liability that broadly matches off against that. Essentially, the initial change that you'll see is broadly a grossing up of the balance sheet. There are some subtle changes towards the income and expenditure account as a result of this and where some of the charges will sit going forward. But the broad picture is that it's going to increase the value on both your assets and liabilities in the balance sheet. We flagged this as a other risk rather than a significant risk because through initial discussions with you, it doesn't feel like it's going to be a materially significant balance. So the level of operating leases you currently have and you currently disclosing in your financial statement suggests that it won't be a significant material adjustment. But there is a process that this kind of implementation of a new standard around leases is putting into place where actually it's a good opportunity to make sure we're capturing all leases anyway. So there's things that could be recognised as leases that are embedded within contracts. So it's given councils and local authorities a good opportunity to kick the tyres to see if there's anything else that should be recognised under that at that stage as well. So what we'll do in this is review process management have undertaken and make sure we're comfortable with that process, and then check that the calculations in terms of the liability being recognised and the asset being recognised are materially correct as well. And we've had initial discussions with management about their approach on that, and comfortable with the proposed approach being taken. The final thing I guess I want to say around risk areas, I've put a bit of narrative underneath that, is about the rebuilding assurance piece. Broadly, our approach this year is that we're going to do a full audit on this year's on the income and expenditure account and balance sheet. You remember last year we were unable to complete everything on the income and expenditure side primarily, and focused our testing on making sure we've got the balance sheet audited, given the short time period and window we had. We've obviously got a bit more space this year. We're presenting a plan to you a good 6 months earlier than last year, and we have the ability to still go up to the end of February if needed. Our proposal on the timeline you'll see is that we're looking to come into you in the later autumn to complete the audit field work, but it gives us that space to make sure we can actually be comfortable 100% on everything in the balance sheet, comfortable 100% on everything in your income and expenditure account this year. And by doing that balance sheet audit this year, it's going to give us that assurance over some of the balance sheet positions last year as well, by working back on some of those. There is still that uncertainty, as I talked about before, about how we build back assurance over reserves. There's still that think tank and working program still going on to understand exactly how best to do that. And we're going to, obviously, we're part of that with all the other audit firms, but actually we'll continue to stay close to that and reassess that. But the bit that's in our control is actually if we can make sure we've got that position on the balance sheet for this year and the income expenditure account for this year, we're in as good a place as we can be then to work towards getting back to a normal opinion over the next few years. Other than that, the key things I wanted to highlight was we have had a change in our audit team in that we've had a new manager join us to boost the capacity of the team, and he's actually going to be coming on to the Cheltenham audit. He's an experienced audit manager. He's joined us from one of the big four firms who was doing this work before the retender of the contract. So he's fitted in pretty seamlessly in terms of that. So very experienced to be able to take this on, and the space to make sure we can do this properly. Timeline I mentioned about doing the work in the autumn. And then I think the only other things to mention, obviously the fees are set by PSAA, but they're there for transparency. There's a couple of things in there down as TBC. One of those is the review of the implementation of IFRS 16. So there will be an element of additional charge associated with the work we need to do around that, which we'll feed back to you on. And then the other element is the additional procedures to rebuild assurance. So there's a process in place at the moment for last year still going on with the PSAA around actually have we saved some time by not having to complete everything. And there'll be some adjustment process going on there for that fee adjustment from prior year, and there'll be a broadly an equal opposite reaction then to having to do additional work to catch up and build that assurance back into this year. So that'll flow through into some fee adjustments in due course. But that's just there for transparency. Other than that, I'll probably pause at that point and happy to take any questions on the proposed approach or any concerns that members have over the audit process this year.
Thanks very much for that very thorough run through, Nathan. Essentially, what you've presented here on our page 21, your page 11, is the process by which you're going to keep us on track with the row back of the backstop. I'm not sure I've phrased that quite correctly, but you know, it would if we follow that timetable, we're staying on track, is what I'm trying to say, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. That sets out sort of key deliverables on both sides, and as I mentioned, you know, the ultimate backstop for next year is the end of February 26. So we're proposing to come back, you know, have the field work completed by the end of 25 calendar year and present back to you in that January 2026 committee.
Thanks. And I think from what you're saying about the valuations and about the pension situation is we're in a good place in that regard. You didn't seem to be expressing concerns, and also I know you talked about IFRS 16. I think we've been under the impression that wasn't going to be a big thing for us, but I think you're agreeing with that.
Yeah, so in terms of valuation, absolutely. It's large values and small change in assumptions can make significant differences, but it's a well-trodden path by management and ourselves. It's nothing new here. We all understand what we need to do on this, and we didn't have any concerns with the process last year in those areas. In terms of IFRS 16, yes, agreed to a certain degree. There's that completeness check, I guess, isn't there, to make sure that we have captured everything that we should do in terms of the definition of a lease.
Okay, and also thanks for our page 24, your page 14, which actually gives a very useful indication of what's going to be coming to us when. So thanks for that. I'll open up now to any questions from. I saw.
Just a quick question about Golden Valley, where we obviously haven't built anything yet, and the occupation rates aren't clear yet. And actually, there are areas that we don't know whether they will be built or not yet. Can you talk me through what you will give in terms of the valuation and the assumptions that will be built into the valuation for that?
Yeah. So I guess it's important to remember we're looking at the position at March just gone. And so, as you say, there's your early stages of the development. So management will pull that valuation together first. But our initial planning discussions have suggested, this will be, there'll be limited kind of costs incurred that be recognised on the balance sheet in terms, other than sort of initial lands and land costs and some planning type costs. So the valuation judgment isn't probably significant at this stage, I would say. But Matt, perhaps let management comment on that.
Yeah, well, so at the moment in the accounts, it will just be valued as land. Clearly, as and when it goes to planning, which one hopes is going to be imminent in the next couple of months, then with the planning consent, one would expect that valuation to increase.
Anything else, Julian? Okay. Councillor Whittingham.
Thanks, Chair. Sort of double-barreled question, probably to both, but in terms of the timeline that we've got, are both Bishop Fleming and management, our council officers, happy that all of the items we can meet on that timeline, given the current resources and the things going on, such as all of the planning around local government reorganisation, which I suspect is taking up a lot of time? And can I just check, there's about a month of contingency at the end of that with what you said of February. So it's just, is it reasonable? Are we approving a reasonable timeline for both sides?
I think I'll ask Paul to come on that first.
Well, I guess I can only base it on experience. I think, as Nathan said, that they did it in a much shorter time frame last time. So I think the audit probably started around about October and came October, November, or maybe even later than that, and obviously achieved the backstop date of February. So we've technically got a clear run this year. The draft statement of accounts, certainly the single entity, because we will be relying on Gloucester Airport to submit their draft accounts for the group accounts, but the single entity accounts, I have every confidence that we will meet the deadline, which again, we have a month extension. The last 2 years, we've met the statutory deadline of May. This year, the team have until the end of June. So, yeah, at this moment in time, I'm extremely confident that the timetable in front of us is achievable.
Yeah, I think just reflected on last year, it was everything was quite concertina because of the impact of the timeline for the previous auditors to sign up on their old backstop position of November. So we weren't able to start till late November last year. This is just a different world of where we're in now. We were able to, as Paul said, the council will be prepared by the end of June. We'll put some time in to get things like sample selections early on. One of the things we do take away from last year is it was very challenging to try and do everything so intensely in over December and January. So spreading this and getting samples out early allows management a bit more time to respond to our queries as well, because we are conscious that not just local government reform, but actually as a council already, you've got a large number of projects ongoing. So we're going to try and we've made a conscious decision there to make it slightly a narrower team, but over a longer period.
Right, Councillor Day, over to you.
Thanks. Good to see you again, Nathan. Just a couple of hopefully quick questions from me. I haven't given up hope yet on a clean audit report for this time, but I appreciate the outstanding sort of work or thoughts over reserves. So if management supply the information in line with the timeline, can you give assurance that it will say be either clean audit report or except for reserves, possibly type qualification report, that there won't be another disclaimer? And just second question is in your plan, you've concluded, or you say you've concluded that the control environment is effective, but you're going to be doing a substantive, not a controls-based audit. And I just wonder if you could explain why, because I'm going back many years, my previous experience is that, substantive audits are a lot more kind of labour intensive, from your side, certainly, than a controls-based audit. So there's, I guess, a potential cost fee implication there. Thank you.
So I can, on the opinion piece, I can give you assurances that we will get to the position where we have completed the work over this year's balance sheet and income and expenditure account. There's a technical review still ongoing about what that means, and if those reserves piece is still outstanding, is that pervasive enough to mean that we can't give an except for opinion, and therefore still needs to be a disclaimer. And that's a sort of sector wide and a technical central team for us to decide on as well. And that's still on, and the initial views are still outstanding on all of that. So I can't really conclude on that for this stage, I'm afraid, but I can just say commit to where we were going to get to in terms of the audit work for this year. And our report will reflect that in terms of our audit findings report, but I get the concern over making sure we get back to a clean audit opinion as soon as possible, because that's where we all want to get to. In terms of the controls work, I think we've probably seen it go in cycles in the audit profession a bit. So it's actually pretty common now that it's much more intensive around substantive testing again. And whether that's substantive testing, sort of transactional, the old ticking and bashing, or whether that's actually using things like data analytics tools, AI type tools that review documents and take some of the legwork away. It is more efficient now as an approach in the sector to go this route. So what we're saying in that essentially is that we've not got any concerns over the control environment, which would suggest that we need to do more work in any area. But actually our approach is going to be focused primarily on transactional testing. And that's the way, the risk areas, as you see in there, all around estimates and judgments on valuations. And that the approach we need to take around that is pretty substantive. So, we'll look at understanding how the process is being followed, but we'll sample test those valuations within the portfolio, understand how those kind of assumptions have been made for each of those individual assets, and it's not really an approach you can take through the control environment route. So there's a lot of the council audit that doesn't really lend itself as well to the transactional to the control environment testing as well. So I think those things combined mean that our approach and to be fair, others in the sector is a very much substantive approach now for local authority audits.
So given my question about Golden Valley, I think I should make a second declaration of interest, actually, just so there's no confusion. I am Cabinet Member for Business, Economic Development, Infrastructure and Planning for Gloucestershire County Council, to make that clear.
An ever-expanding portfolio. Any other questions for Nathan? Okay, thanks very much, Nathan. And can we move on now to Lucy, item 6, the internal audit plan, and the audit charter and mandate as well. We can have a vote at the end of this, and And so bear in mind, you'll be voting for me to sign this off as Audit Committee Chair on your behalf, the internal audit plan for this year. So thanks. Over to you, Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. This is the first report from us this evening. As you've alluded to, it's the internal audit plan and charter for 2025-26. The plan came to the last meeting of this committee for consultation purposes, so anything in the plan shouldn't be a surprise to you. The charter is a document that we have to bring to the committee for approval on an annual basis, and we've delayed bringing it because we're now working to the new global internal audit standards. So this is a revised version of a charter that the committee has seen previously, but happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Lucy. Any questions from members on that before I sign? Councillor Day.
This is just one question, hopefully not too complicated. Looking through the proposed audit areas, there are sort of 3 different audit areas linked to climate change. The one being operational, around what business areas are doing to support the council's commitment to the climate emergency. And then the second one, which is just climate change, is assessment of the council's commitment to the climate emergency. And I was just wondering what the difference was between those 2 types of audit.
I think, to be honest, you've probably answered your own question in that the first audit, the operational audit, will be going to talk to those service areas and meeting with officers and saying, what are your service areas doing? And maybe saying, could you do more? But then the other piece of work will be working with the climate officers to see what the council is doing overall. And what we'll also be doing, I think very shortly, is auditing the greenhouse gas emission data that needs to be published. And that will all form part of the same type of audit.
Just a kind of observation on the digital discrimination audit. Just a point of clarity. Digital discrimination, i.e. people who don't have digital skills or don't use digital platforms, is obviously a serious issue. But I would argue it's also an issue if you are not aggressively digital enough and using the newest platforms, particularly for young people, and you need to meet people where they're at. So I would ask that the audit is looking at both ends of the spectrum. Are we doing the paper for the people who are excluded, but are we using the newest platforms in the smartest possible way to reach the people who really value those platforms?
It will also be looking at the accessibility of the council, which might feed into that. So looking at the accessibility of how the council's websites are set up and making sure, everyone can be involved and use those platforms.
Yeah, I think it's a very positive steer. It would be good, very good to have that sort of both ends approach. Councillor Day.
Thank you. I guess my question is led by the fact, we are an environment where we have disclaimers on our audit report. So for me, there's a leg of the stool, unfortunately, kind of missing at the moment. So I'm kind of putting more reliance on your work, to be frank. And I just wondered if you could give a guide of how much of your time you anticipate it will be spent on core, kind of processes and numbers-based work. Thank you.
The core audits, as you'd say, the number, we don't tend to do how auditing was years ago, and that's because we don't do tick and bashing and we don't check all the numbers. We just look at a multitude of things now. But the core audits are the ones that you've got on the first page of the plan. And I would say, I think Cheltenham has about 360 days in the audit plan. And I would think there'd be a maximum of 100 days looking at the core financials, which include your revenues and benefit systems and some of your IT systems, but we work closely with John Chilton on those. So probably a maximum of 100 days, but that would give you, because the processes are so good that are in place, we can take assurances from the previous year's work as well. And what we tend to do is like a 3-year programme. We don't look at the same thing every year because it would be too big, but we would give an assurance over 3 years of a whole system.
Thanks, Lucy. Yeah, given what's come here over the last 2 or 3 years now, it seems to me there's a reasonable emphasis on that core work. So whilst there's a good agenda of other items, I don't think that doesn't feel to me as if we're internal audit are neglecting those other core areas. Just I should have really come back to Councillor Davis. That feels to me like a good range of audit of our climate change work / carbon reduction agenda. Is there anything that are you happy with that, with that agenda?
Yeah, so my question was really more, it referred to business areas initially, and then the second, I didn't really know what the difference was between the two. That was all I needed to clarify. So yeah, I think it's a broad enough spectrum.
Any more questions for Lucy on this item? Councillor Willingham.
Thanks, Chair. I was just going to ask one thing, where you've got on page 35, the second item about staff welfare. Could I ask that you look just slightly into councillor welfare in some specific sort of circumstances? So, for example, licensing occasionally has exempt reports that deal with allegations management in relation to licensed drivers, possibly licensed premises, which can be quite unpleasant reading. And I know some members maybe end up having to have oversight of things like serious case reviews if there's been a death of a vulnerable child, and then there's multi-agency safeguarding reports. And I know some members have had issues which aren't just the thick skin of politics of people being threatened or having other sort of crimes like that perpetrated against them, which cross the line. And I just think it would be useful to just, in those sort of very specific circumstances, just make sure that we are trying to support members. If it's an exempt report, for example, having a cover sheet that just says, this is who you can talk to if you have concerns about this within the council. Just little simple things where people handle different things in different ways, and I just think it's worth looking at.
Thanks to you. Happy to note that. I would echo David's concerns there, because I've been aware of several issues myself. Okay, so I'd like a show of hands if you're all happy for me to sign off this audit plan now. Thank you. Okay, Judith, got that recorded? Marvellous. Okay, item number 7. Lucy is up again here. The audit update.
Thank you, Chair. This is a usual update from the internal audit team. It gives you an idea of the work that we've conducted since the last meeting of this committee. Today, you've got 3 reports in your pack. Bear with, I'm just scrolling through. There's a voids review, there's a homelessness deposit rent scheme, and the final report for members' allowances. Those reports are in your pack, as I just said. And Victoria and a member of our team continue to follow up all the agreed actions on behalf of the council. But happy to take any questions on this part of the report as well, Chair.
Well, before we move on to questions, can I ask you to give a little bit more information on the first couple of reports, which aren't terribly complimentary, shall we say?
I will have a go, but I admit I did not do the audit. The void process report was requested by Claire, if I recall, following some issues that were identified at Cheltenham Borough Homes before they transferred into the council. And having read through the report this evening properly, I think it is as it says it is, but I know that the agreed actions are being worked on.
Could we have a bit of a discussion about those agreed actions? Because I wasn't quite clear of the timescale with which we were going to resolve these clearly significant problems.
All the agreed actions that should be included in the Appendix B of the report, and they should all be listed in there. So page 64 onwards.
have we got any updates from those fairly bland statements about we're looking into it and we'll come back to you? I mean, it talks about extending deadlines, but it doesn't really talk about how we're going to make a big difference to what was.
Do you have any specific reference numbers? And I can look at that. If there is any the specifics that would.
Well, there's 51413 down to 5147, and we're talking about priority 1s and 2s here, and for instance, the priority 1, there's no timescale at all. Who's CHP? What's CHP? Okay.
So there are several of these that I've chased today, and that I've been passed over to a member of staff, so I'm just waiting a response for them. There's another one where I've been given various details, but they're requesting an extension, and I need to get that approved by the officer, which would be Claire Hughes. So I need to discuss that with her. That only happened very recently, so. Well,
it may be that there'll be a protracted period for a resolution, but we haven't really got a plan here, have we? And it feels that you want to have yeah, Paul.
So members will probably have realised today, because it's popped in your inbox, that whilst full council has been shelved because of no particular business, we're using the opportunity to give a full member update in terms of where we are on housing. I totally get in terms of what you've received here, but I think we need to reflect in terms of from a council perspective, we only know what we know, and the beauty of having an internal audit service whereby they're not constrained by management and told to look where management want them to look because it's going to be good. Lucy has an element of independence as our chief internal auditor to obviously look at both of those areas. So firstly, I would like to say that what we're detailing here is not just the good stuff, like the financial controls in place, but actually the things that we've uncovered. So, the homelessness deposit scheme, obviously that's not good reading either. I think, unlike the voids process, we can obviously counter that and put some of those recommendations in place quite easily. But the voids is a systematic issue in so much that there's a whole workforce that needs to turn those round, whether that be minor voids or major voids. And obviously what the team are now doing, working with a number of interims and new staff, is getting all those processes in place so that we're compliant with procurement, so that we're compliant with the consumer standards, so we're compliant with health and safety, and getting it right. It will take time, but I can give intermediate assurance that a lot of work is taking place in the background. I mean, I don't know whether the chair of housing wants to elaborate on some of that, because obviously Councillor Tuck is probably a little bit more in the know in terms of what's happening, but rest assured this has not been written in a way to disguise the issue. It's a fundamental thing that needs to be resolved over time.
Yeah, and indeed, I wasn't expecting us to solve it tonight, I just think that the stuff that comes to this committee just needs to have that sort of plan, which I'm sure you're all discussing now. But I just think certainly by the time we get to July, we want something here that reassures us that you are having those discussions and that the process is in place. Julian, do you want to?
Sure. So this is a subject I feel very strongly about, and I know that Claire Hughes also feels extremely strongly about it. And strong conversations have happened about this. It's not suitable for this committee to talk about exactly what those conversations are, but believe me, the conversations are happening, and there will be progress on this. Is that enough?
I mean, I've read this page, 59 in our pack, I guess like 4 times. And each time it just leaves me speechless, if I'm honest. I mean, the only positive thing I can see is that Claire, the Director of Governance and customer services, requested the audit. But I think, this needs to be, all these points need to be addressed and fixed, with alacrity, because we've got, evidence of multiple orders raised against properties, order splitting, really, to keep within the 10K limit. No budget monitoring activity, 36 officers with order approval permissions, quotations non-existent. Yeah, I mean, it just goes on, and I just wonder, whether we need to have a really forensic, not making any allegations against anybody, but controls are there to protect individuals as well as the organisation as a whole. And it, to me, from what I'm reading, it just seems like there were just no controls, because no controls were operating effectively, and I just beggars. Well, I just staggered, to be honest, and I really think it just needs to be a massive priority to just close all these things off, ASAP, and report back to this committee, with a follow-up audit just to confirm, that we've got. That has been done, and we've got evidence that an appropriate control environment is in place and operating effectively.
And I can reassure you that we will be doing a follow-up audit because of how that report reads. Yeah. It will be in the plan either for later this year or early next year.
Yeah, sure. I'm reassured by what I've heard from Julian and Paul that we're on it now. I think for July there ought to be some sort of. You can't go into detail, I know, but some sort of reassurance for this committee about the process, and then obviously your re-auditing will be further down the line, when systems are.
What I'll do for the next committee, Chair, I'll give the committee more information on the agreed actions, because that's just really an excerpt from the system. It doesn't tell you what the actual agreed action was with the officer, and we'll have a full update on all those actions for July.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to add, Julian? Yeah.
I feel I do need to restate. I completely agree with Councillor Day. I completely agree with all his points, and I completely agree that the audit process is critical to this, and there need to be transparent metrics in public with deadlines. I would reiterate the point, though, that in order to meet those metrics and those deadlines, progress needs to be made in private, and we will get on with that and then report back.
Okay, I think that's probably as far as we need to go tonight. Personally, for me, the homelessness deposits are much more of a minor issue. If anybody wishes to express another opinion, please do. But you want to?
I don't know if you can comment on this, but when I read this, I thought, this is maybe just unfortunate that we're trying to do one thing and we haven't realised we've strayed into a statutory area, some kind of financial services regulations, which understandably are very strict, that are applying. But I was slightly concerned over the, it seems like that we don't necessarily know how much a recipient has paid against their advance. And I was just wondering, is there any risk, that somebody could overpay? Would we pick that up if somebody was, say, making a regular payment every month and they just carry on to think, I'm going to do this until somebody tells me to stop? And the other thing which I wondered if you can comment on is I just wondered, which is in the report, given this must take quite a bit of admin time with what is happening, is whether if we did go down just giving people non-refundable grants, that would take away, I guess, a lot of this admin, and actually, is there a chance the council would actually save money rather than it actually being a cost to the council? Because that would just solve all the issues, I think.
No, because at the time of the audit, when the auditor was undertaking the audit, when we were talking about the repayments, we felt when the repayments were coming back in, they would be recycled for someone else to have that money, rather than look at it from the way you're saying, that we're thinking someone has a loan in this instance, they repay that loan is then recycled to the next person that needs that fund. We didn't look at it from the perspective, I don't think, of a grant and that money not coming being repaid and removing that admin fee. So we were looking at it more of the recycling route. But I guess we could do a piece of work to look at what you're suggesting. I don't know, Paul might have an opinion on this. It might be better if he does.
Well, I think this was a method, that in days gone by, there used to be something called private sector delivery grants. So central government used to give us significant sums of money, hundreds of thousands of pounds, to do that. Along with every other cut, that's something else that's been cut. So a loan deposit scheme has been put in place. Obviously, if you were to turn this into a grant, then as council, that has to be funded from local taxation. So you would then have to create a new pot of money to fund that. So that would have to come forward as part of the budget proposals rather than a recommendation via the internal audit.
Another job for the chair of housing, I think. Chris, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wonder, how much money are we talking here? How much is outstanding at any point in time, over how many people?
I would have to come back unless someone...
I was just going to add, if you start to introduce grants as well, you increase the risk of fraud, because of course repayment of something deters people much more than free money. So along with that grant scheme comes much more risk of fraud, and with that will then come, so where we're doing administrative function on collecting money back in, you'd then have to put the administrative function into verifying that the correct people were getting the right money and it was going to the right person. It wasn't a fraudulent application. So it swings in roundabouts. If
Lucy can email us with that figure, that would help.
Yeah.
Chris, you want to say something else? I
So-
must go on to
Just
David.
finished then, I think then, are we saying actually the council, we do need to comply with the Consumer Credit Act? Because we need, if we are subject to statutory regulations through our activities, we've got to comply with them. We can't be acting in non-compliance, even if we're doing it, with the best of intentions.
Thanks, Chair. So looking at the first of these, I was just going to ask, we've got some stuff about particular contractors. Was any work done to make sure that the lack of control didn't lead to work being billed that hadn't actually been done? Have we checked that there isn't, whether there is or isn't an element of, there's obviously the potential for fraud, but has there been anything that needs to be reclaimed or needs to be re-looked at in that? That's the first question. In terms of the spreadsheet, it's rather worrying that on page 65, the two priority ones on the loan agreements don't have any text with them, and one of them's been one of them has been moved back from a end of the last municipal year to June this year with no comment on it. The final question I'd like to ask is about the ones about the members' allowance. Is this just a case that people, is this a case of people not submitting receipts to allow VAT, or is it people getting the scheme wrong? And again, can we just check that there isn't any fraud there? Because otherwise I can see this being expanded in the sort of media and private eye and what have you about the policy. So it's a case of, is it people just not following the guidance? And I'll start, are the people that approve the claims challenging members robustly enough to go, no, you haven't submitted your receipt, you're not having your expenses, because that seems to be the thing that we want to make sure happens.
Your first question was on contractors. Was that in the void audit? Yes, please.
So we did assist and look at this, but with all of our cases, clearly, if you want to get something to a criminal standard and get it into court, you can't undermine your own defence. You've read the audit, and because of the internal control issues, we've got to be pragmatic about what we do and don't do. So we supported, we've got lots of work on the invoices in the background, but essentially we did support the work, but we've got to be sensible about where we put our resources. And, you know, if you're proving something to a certain standard, we've got to be pragmatic about it. But obviously that's very different in terms of staff and when you look at disciplinary. So there was definitely support for that work. I haven't received any referrals for the members' allowances, so I would suggest that it's not fraudulent, it will be error, because if it was, internal audit would have sent something through to us.
Thank you. In response to priority 1, I've just had a look at our internal audit system. I think that's an error in this report, and I think the original timescale is the 30th of June, the same as all the others. So I think the auditor put the date in wrong. So that's why there's no text, because it's not due until the end of June. And was that all your members' allowances, or has Emma covered that off? It's probably a mix of both, is the honest answer. And to be honest, we're finding that across the board on all councils. It's not, but it's definitely not fraud.
So I think the feedback is whoever signs them off needs to just stand up to members and go, no receipt, you're not having it. And I'm seeing lots of nodding heads, so there we go.
Never filled one in my life, so I don't know the system. Personal bugbear, I hate it when the timescale is passed. We've got an original timescale, that's fine. I don't think it's a good look, and I'd rather have another. Well, I'd rather there was something in the text, and if the timescale goes out, that's fine. But something that makes sense. It doesn't really make sense as it is, and I do agree. It's not once it's got into this report, you do need some text.
Yeah, apologies, Chair. I didn't write the report this time. I was on leave, so Jane had
I'll stop moaning.
took it
Sorry.
for me. But hopefully, normal service resumed for next time.
Thanks, and thanks for the 2 reports, Lucy. Right, so I think we're on to Emma now. Counter fraud unit. Just to confirm, we don't need a vote on item 7. Similarly on item 8, we won't. But Emma, do you want to introduce your report? Do you want to you can actually do the whistleblowing at the same time, if you like.
Yep, perfect. Okay. So the first report is your 6-monthly update from my service area. I have introduced in the financial implications a bit of a breakdown in terms of revenue, penalties and loss avoidance. Members have asked for that more clearly at other councils. So that is what is reported in this report. So it's only what's in the report. It's not any other work, etc. It's only what's within the report. In terms of the work plan for last year, the grants was a focus. We are administering more grants. We are obtaining more grants. So the grants management policy that Claire introduced, we've done a supporting toolkit. So any staff member that now is putting together a grant application, verification process, there'll be lots of tools and information in there about what declarations they need to put in the forms, what checks we need to do to confirm businesses are legitimate, that people are legitimately applying, etc., etc. So it will be a bit of a guide of what they should and shouldn't do, and we'll continue to support where we can in terms of verification activities. This year, there is a huge focus on procurement, which off the back of the contractors is, again, it's not because of activity here, it's generally the new Act is quite significant. And we're hoping to support the procurement teams across all of the partner councils with ensuring there is much more transparency around our processes, bidding, the tender documents, the contract, that everything is on the contracts register. The new overseeing unit, I think it's about ensuring that the council is robust, so there isn't any element of, well, are they missing anything? Should they be doing something? So there's a lot of work to do regarding that, which may include just a kind of really quick and easy tips and hints for staff, what you should and shouldn't be doing. The Gloucestershire MAF webpage is almost finished, so we should be able to launch that for all the residents, businesses, anybody that visits Gloucestershire, and trying to make it localised. So again, what local scams are affecting local people and how they avoid them. It's also a bit of a central point for what types of fraud need to be reported where, because it's such an enormous area. People can get lost in what on earth they're trying to report. And also important, there's an awful lot of information about victim support as well. So how they can access the right support from the right people. 3.4 outlines your usual update in terms of the National Fraud Initiative matches that we undertake. So revenue there, but as always, most of that goes to the county, so we don't get to keep it. And we've done some additional work with the Revenues and Benefits team, 3.5, about additional checks for single person discount. Housing waiting list was reviewed and the loss avoidance figures are there, 3.7, 3.8. And I gave a bit more information this time, 3.9 and 10, about what we do and why we do it, and the figures in terms of the housing list. 3.13 onwards is about the reactive work that we undertake. So that's the referrals that come in from the various teams across the council, and the results that we have working with those teams. Also disciplinary matters that HR refer, or any code of conduct information that we refer. I've also now started to do an annual report into Cabinet Housing Committee on the housing and tenancy fraud work, so that they've got a wider understanding as well of the support that we give there. And again, I've given you a quick high level set of information at 3.20 onwards about that work that we undertake with the stock. You need your annual update in terms of any surveillance activity, use of the Investigatory Powers Act, so that is at 3.24 onwards. But the main point at 3.31 is that there have been a number of RIPA applications, all concerning overt activity. So whilst that's not covert surveillance, we still make sure that there's a process that the staff go through to complete to ensure that any activity, even if it's overt, is necessary, proportionate, and we're not interfering with anybody's rights in any way at all. Happy to take any questions regarding the report.
Very good value for money.
That's right. I was just going to say something similar to you, Chair. The amount of money we're getting back on this is a pretty good return on investment, I think, of deploying people. You know, we say 125, give or take, 125,000 extra in revenue. Pretty good. 34,000 in loss avoidance. Again, really good figure, especially given all the issues with homelessness. So, and the criminal penalties there show that, again, where appropriate, we're taking it through the judicial system or using that route to go to tackle fraud. So well done, keep it up. Thank you very much.
Obviously, I'd echo that, and I mean, it also enables us to. We've got a way of dealing with two of our significant risks. It's not just the money; it's the deterrence and the dealing with the risk. So, good news all round, really. Okay, can we go on to the whistleblowing? Oh, sorry, Councillor Davis.
Just one question. The multi-agency approach to fraud group and the campaign to launch that. It says publicised soon, which is fine. Do you have a sort of rough idea of what timescale soon is, or is that sort of just in the works? We'll know when we'll know.
I think the Tewkesbury team who have built it for us will probably come after me if I don't get it sorted pretty soon. It's been going on for ages. So it's been quite arduous, as you can imagine, trying to collate all those different teams and people. It's been like herding cats. So getting the right information and being able to make it local, which is what this is about. It's not just another national fraud website. That's been quite difficult. But I have penciled in to do some last work with the Tewkesbury team to build all the stats into it. And then we are meeting, the group meets at the beginning of July. So the plan is to kind of review it, give it the okay, and then we all launch it as a collective. So July sort of time, fingers crossed. Otherwise, as I say, I'll be beaten.
Thank you.
Okay, over to you again for the whistleblowing.
Yes, hopefully this is quite straightforward. It was due a review. I have hopefully highlighted quite sensibly in there. The red text is the new stuff. The strike through is that will be deleted. Nothing significant. It gets rid of that in good faith and makes it just there's a reasonable belief that what the individual is reporting is correct. We've done the communication update across all 6 partner councils to encourage staff. And the 2 attachments there are really what's easier for the staff to deal with. So the flow chart is for the whistleblower outlining a quick sort of guide rather than having to read a 15-page policy. But I've also found that the individuals that were receiving referrals were not really clear on what they should do and what was and wasn't whistleblowing. So we've also introduced that guidance to support the staff that get referrals and how they should manage those and what they need to do. So yeah, a bit of a refresh of the policy, and yours covers Cheltenham, Stroud and Tewkesbury.
For those of us in black and white, I think I'm pleased to say that the reds were underlined. So that's, and I've read this through. All seem fine to me, but are any questions for Emma? Dr. Day? Where? Chris?
There's a typo I kind of enjoyed, just so you know, on page 103, just to try and be helpful. I think it says veracity. I think it should be VE, yeah. So I thought that rewarded my my reading of the whole document. But I think the answer is, I'm sure, is yes. But I was thinking from previous experience when I guess people have come to me, you know, saying we've whistleblower, and where it's been where somebody, it's not been, you know, malicious, vexatious or false. It's just somebody doing their job, only seeing part of the system. You know, from what they can see, they think, oh my God, you know, but actually with an understanding of all the embedded controls, etc., you know, it's all fine. And I think it is clear in the document that there's no way that would be considered to be vexatious, false, you know, that is just the day to day, and that all the staff, you know, who would be involved would understand that and would take it in that spirit.
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody that receives a referral, clearly, you know, the whole point is you've then got to test whether or not it is true, if there's more to it than just, as you say, somebody's observation of a small part of somebody's role. I'd much rather everybody came forward with any concerns and then we can rule those out and find those that are of concern. But yeah, absolutely, we wouldn't then, it defeats the object to then make people feel uncomfortable about whether they should or shouldn't come forward. But yeah, it's a balancing act. It's making sure we're sensible.
We have to take a vote now on the revised policy and approve it. I think we are. Can we all vote one way or the other? Thank you. We are all in favour of the new policy being passed. So we can now move on to item 10, which is Gemma's item on the draft accounting policies, which look to be broadly similar to what we've already got. But if you want to highlight any material differences, please feel free.
Oh, you spoiled the surprise. So it doesn't feel like 2 minutes since we were here with the last set of accounts, but we are into close down now well and truly for 24-25. So as Nathan said in the earlier item, so we have a deadline of the end of June to produce the draft statement accounts and publish those on our website. So this is obviously, our accounting policies are obviously key to that. So no major changes compared to previous years, but just for the committee to note for now, obviously they will then come back in the final statement of accounts when we come back post-audit for sign-off and approval.
Thanks, Gemma. Any questions for Gemma? Councillor Day, you've withdrawn your doctorate.
I've actually got 5, and is it better to take them one by one? I think it probably is. So on page 106, where it's section 2.3 and 2.4 refer to May 2024, and I just wondered if that was a typo, because I didn't. If it's typo, that's fine. We'll move on. Yeah. So on the capex, we have a £10,000 de minimis limit, and I just wondered if there are any implications for tracking assets. So say if we buy a projector for £6,000, would we have some operational kind of register or something? If it grew legs and disappeared, would we realise?
So if it was capitalised, yes, it would fall within our fixed asset register. So that's how we would track that. Yeah. If it wasn't, I think if we're talking about the majority of those type of assets would be ICT equipment. In the most part, because they are bulk purchases, we do tend to capitalise them. And obviously, as our IT service is delivered by Publica, they have their own register themselves, so they can track the assets, and that's why all our laptops have a unique reference. In terms of one-off expenditure of the nature that the example that you gave, so say a projector, if that was purchased by a service, the expectation on our delegated budgets would be that that service would monitor that that equipment and make sure that it was safeguarded in line with our financial and other regulations.
Yeah, I think it's more an operational issue for those departments, isn't it, than a accounting policies issue.
Yeah, I was thinking, because sometimes, organisations would probably get some poor intern to do a fixed asset verification, but generally you can only do that on what's on the fixed asset register, and like if you've got 10 grand, could be some other things. But moving on.
You can challenge the limit. Once you set a limit, I think. Anyway, sorry. Your next question.
Yeah, so if I've understood, so we don't capitalise borrowing costs on assets under construction. And I just wondered if that's a choice we've made, or that's a sector, policy. And just to confirm, does that mean that all the interest costs that the council incurs is debited to the general reserve, as it's incurred, if we're not capitalising anything?
You're happy for me to say that? So, yes, you are correct. It is our choice. The interest costs that we're incurring within the financial years we are talking about within these accounting policies, the interest costs have been credited to general reserve. Yes.
And next is the depreciation of vehicles, plant and furniture. I just wondered why we don't have a... Oh, sorry. Okay. I just wondered why... Wouldn't it be easier to do a straight line over the estimated useful life? I'm just looking for it at the moment, where it says a percentage of the value of each class of assets as advised by a suitably qualified officer. That's depreciation of vehicles, plant, furniture and equipment. I'm just wondering, would it just not be easier to do a straight line depreciation over the estimated useful life with that? Page 118, sorry. It's the second bullet point under depreciation.
So I think that's just a fancier way of saying straight line. So these accounting policies, they are, the majority of them, they are taken from a set of model policies that are published in the Local Government Code of Practice. So if that was the wording that was in the model policies, that's the wording that we've adopted. But effectively, yes. So for Ubico vehicles, for example, they are depreciated over 7 years.
Need to use basic language for us. We're a big lot. Chris.
Yeah, and then finally, 130, I just wondered if there was a typo in the post-balance sheet events. So in the first bullet point, I just wonder if it should be either during or before and the end of the reporting period, whereas it says after. Page 130. So I think it's getting at what are considered to be adjusting post-balance sheet events. So I think it should be before rather than after the reporting period, should it? Where you're talking about evidence of conditions.
So I think here, where we're referring to the reporting period, we mean the year end, so the 31st of March. So I guess you could also interchangeably use reporting period as the date that the audit opinion is given. So where we would so events after the balance sheet date would be anything that would occur between the 31st of March of that financial year where we've done the close and when we then come to report the final accounts that would potentially impact on the events before. So I think we had an event 2 years ago where we had a settlement that was settled in the May of that year. We disclosed it as an event after the balance sheet date because it was a material amount and it had occurred between the date of the reporting period and the date that we then signed on the dotted line of the final accounts. Does that make sense?
It feels like the right thing to be doing for transparency, doesn't it? But
It's just, I've gone back a long way, I guess, in my knowledge, but I just think, were we talking about what events we would adjust for in the accounts, that you have evidence that will happen after the year end, but it's evidence that relates to a condition that was in place pre the year end in order for it to be considered an adjusting event. And that's why I just wonder if there is a typo in that first bullet point when you read the whole note. But you know,
Sorry. We can certainly go back and look at the wording of that. Yeah, no problem.
This is going to be far less interesting, but on page 113, under the discretionary benefits stuff on my certainly on my document, it looks like there's quite a large gap where words have been deleted or what. I'm guessing someone might have pressed tab instead of typing a space. So it sort of says discretionary benefits, the council has restricted powers, and then it says benefits in the big gap event of early retirements, and then award to any member, big gap of staff. I think something's gone wrong with the pagination, so it's just really like rough on the eye, and it might just lending someone sticking an extra word in there. So it might just be worth just checking the document, the source document. As I said, not very exciting.
So in your packs, you should have a note on the risk register update. So I won't go through it all in detail, but I'll happily take questions and I'll just highlight some key points. At the start of the document, I've highlighted how we're currently managing risks within the council and how we're looking to do that moving on to our new system, Verto. This is now live and I've started migrating the risks onto that. I've highlighted some of the benefits of Verto, and certainly it will be able to, it will be a benefit for us to be able to manage some of our mitigations and have a lot more detail. It's quite a, it's a detailed tool. And it will also, as I've noted, the aspiration will be to have our operational risk registers on there so that we'll have a more comprehensive overview of all risks across the council. I've highlighted 2 new risks that were added in March since we last updated. And I've just, again, I won't go through those. One risk was closed around high street defects. And you'll also note that one risk actually materialised, therefore will no longer be on the risk register, but just to note that it's being actively managed as an issue. We then move on, and I've noted an overview of those risks that have increased since the last assessment. Again, happy to take questions if anyone has any on the details of that. I've also noted those that reduced since the last assessment. And then I've just done a little bit of a high-level data. This is just an example of what I've been using in lists. As I say in the note at the top, Verto provides a lot more information and can provide a lot more dashboards. So if this is something that members would like to see in the future, I can provide more information on that. At the moment, I'm just trying to give a bit of an overview as to how risks are changing, the risk actions, and some of the main areas of business of which those risks sit. And finally, on the last page of the report, you'll see the highest risks on the corporate risk register, so those that are a risk score of 20, and I've just given a high-level summary of those 2. I think that's everything, and I'm happy to take any questions.
So, where risks have increased, I'm sure there will be a process in place for addressing the possible consequences of those increases and, possibly considering further mitigations. What's the process for bringing that to this committee, or would that be within the management team to report back to us if, well, question mark, what would occasion that report back? But yeah, is that?
So risks are reviewed on a regular basis. There's a next assessment set with the risk owner, and then we would essentially assess whether or not that's changed, and we'd update the mitigations accordingly. That would then also, of course, goes to leadership team, and that's sort of challenged at those meetings. If you need more detail in the report, I'm happy to provide that, but I'm not.
So, yeah, my question is really, what is this committee's role in that, if any? What is it that goes through for consideration? Do we not have some sort of role in, oh my God, it's the leadership team, they haven't done anything with it, we're really worried about that? Or is that process carried out in a different way?
Yeah, I mean, I'm more than happy to. So I've sort of this has been passed on, and I've just sort of emulated similar reports that have been previously provided. But I'm more than happy to highlight where risks and where they've gone through a process, or what they've changed from. So if they've gone from a 16 to a 20, I'm happy to highlight that. So I'm happy to make note of that, and for future reports we can highlight that. Does that answer the question?
So, I mean, I was just thinking, you've told us there's an increased risk here, and are we just going to say okay? But it may well. I'm not saying for 1 minute that we're not, as an organisation, thinking about it. I just think it's probably at least best to have a note here when you talk about the increase of why and what's being done about it. I think that from our aspect, I think that reassurance would be helpful.
That's absolutely not a problem. I can bring that to future meetings.
So, declaration of interest again. I'm the cabinet member responsible for Junction 10 at GCC. Just as I should state, I'm the cabinet member responsible for it for a week, and I had my first briefing on Monday. So I am agnostic about this position and this discussion until I have all the facts. And I'm waiting to get all the facts. A point of fact, though, my understanding is that Section 105 payments are the responsibility of the contractor, so BDH. They're not the responsibility of CBC. So the discussion on Section 105 payments is between the contractor and GCC, not CBC. You also suggest some outcomes depending on what happens with the discussion between BDH and CBC. I'd like more evidence of fact around those outcomes before they go on the risk register.
Can I just ask, is this in relation to risk 413? Okay. So I'm sort of, in terms of that risk, I would say that obviously I'm not the risk owner for that one, so I'd be more than happy to take away any comments and discuss that with the risk owner. Yeah.
Given that it's the subject of the negotiation, and given that different parties are discussing about possible impacts, just finish the point, different parties are positive. Your microphone, sorry. And given that different parties are positing about the impacts of that negotiation, I don't think we can say this is a truth until the facts have been laid out more clearly.
Okay, so I think there's an element of confusion. Risk 413 is not Golden Valley specific. The risk says M5 Junction 10 planning. If CBC and Tewkesbury Borough Council do not come to an agreement with GCC as local highways authority in regards to the highway capacity in advance of the field built out of them, that could impact all developments across Cheltenham in terms of, which is obviously what we've seen to date with some of those because of the perceived dead weight in terms of what can be delivered before. So I think this particular risk is separate in terms of the conversations with HBD. Yeah.
So, what is true?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, what is true, though, is that Section 106 payments are due from the developers, not from the council. Please correct me if I'm wrong. And therefore, developers, they are the developers' issue with GCC, so my understanding is, not the council's issue. Now, that is probably more complicated than that, but I don't think this risk is giving the full story, and it just concerns me that it's laid out in this very simple form when I suggest there is a lot of complexity to go through.
Well, maybe, I mean, we were talking about this extensively today on our visit to Elms Park, as you can imagine, and, you know, it's very much CBC, TBC involved, because if Junction 10 isn't progressing over the next 15 to 20 years, I think it's very unlikely we'd be able to get to a stage where we could get anywhere near completing that build. So there's going to be a number of planning applications on that side of town. I mean, I imagine there's probably some way into Tewkesbury as well that would be affected by these. Nathan, thanks. That would be affected. So it needs to be here, doesn't it? It feels, because it is quite a big risk to this authority as well as Tewkesbury Borough and Gloucester County Council. So I'm not. I appreciate the complexity, but we've got to have something like this, haven't we? I think, Julian.
maybe we take it away from these meetings and come back with it with different wording. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. With regards to the increase in risk and the reduction in risk on a few of the items, would it be possible to get a little bit more of a sort of description as to why these things have increased or decreased? So, for example, the reduction in medium-term financial strategy, if CBC is unable to come up with long-term solutions which bridge the gap, etc., have we gotten better at coming up with long-term solutions since the last risk register?
Yeah, I think that was my point, that we need a little bit more here, don't
Yeah,
we?
yeah.
For it to be meaningful for us. Yeah. Yeah. And I think Victoria's probably going to address that going forward, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to address that going forward. I'm just trying to find that particular example, if I could perhaps give you an answer to that one. But I think it would have been that the mitigating actions would have been updated as a result, and then that the owner would have, would be Gemma, so we would have agreed collectively that therefore the risk was more sufficiently mitigated and we could have reduced the risk as a result.
Yeah, I don't doubt you've got the information. It would just be cool to have it, that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, really, just to, I was really going to make the same points, Adrian, and Councillor Davis as well. You know, as Ashley, my one was the high street defects. I mean, I'm thinking of the Strand, which maybe technically isn't considered part of the high street, but just understanding why it was the risk owner decided that was closed when, you know, it's certainly a subject of open debate and causes me distress every time I walk along the artificial oil slick covered beach coming here, for example. But the other point I had was on the highest risk items, which I'm just looking for, page 137. I just wondered on 4 and 5 whether the implications of those, although they're worded differently, but I wondered if they're actually the same, in that both would lead to requiring greater savings than already planned. I mean, that's clearly stated in number 4, but number 5, prioritisation of capital resources, that, you know, if we have to rely on borrowing to fund service investments, then that would increase pressure on the revenue budgets from increased interest costs. And I'm just thinking, well, we're going to have to find savings to offset that. It's just maybe, that's assuming I've understood, you know, what that risk actually is. And if so, I just think, you know, consistency in wordings really kind of makes it jump out, you know, that would be the implication ultimately on the council.
Well, I can see the link, but they are, for me, they're distinct financially. You'd want a different set of mitigations for both, although I appreciate there is linkage, but for me it feels like they're two different risks. But I'll get Gemma.
As they are my risks, I'll take this one. So the reason we have them separate, I guess, is how we monitor the risks is around mitigating actions, and Victoria's already mentioned mitigating actions. So I think number 4 is a relatively new risk. I think we spoke and documented it at length in the budget papers this year that we're due this fair funding review, and that's something external. So we have to be prepared to react to whatever it will include, but at the moment we don't know what that is. and we don't know the extent of that. So the mitigations are slightly different to number 5, the prioritisation of capital resources, which is more within our control. So those mitigations about prioritising the capital programme, quite a live conversation at the moment. Particularly, you know, you'll see within the outturn report and in the budget papers of the approved capital programme for 25-26 onwards, it's much more condensed than in previous years, because, you know, we've worked with the Cabinet on the mitigations to address some of those and prioritise those capital resources. So you're right that both have financial impacts, and both could have significant negative financial impacts if they're not mitigated sufficiently. But we've phrased them slightly differently because we've got different mitigations.
I'll just come back on the high street defects risk action that you mentioned as well, if you don't mind. So the reason why that risk was closed was because the litigation's concluded, and therefore the risk itself was a financial risk. As you'll know, the CBC may have to rectify at their own cost, and therefore the litigation's concluded and the risk is closed. Okay.
We're part of the council process. So we're part of their normal business. I'm more than happy to do an annual report. I'm not crystal clear what would be a part of that. We haven't done one, certainly in my time, so we haven't really got a template. Judith has kindly scanned around the country for possible templates to use, and we are thinking about things to include in that. Pity Victoria's just gone because it's come from Claire, and therefore I was hoping she might be able to tell us precisely what's in Claire's mind that we want. But obviously, if any members have got any thoughts about what they'd like to put in an annual report to council, it feels like you're reporting to yourself to me. But hey, as a you know, if you please do, I would welcome any thoughts you have on that, because I suspect in the end I will probably end up doing something, and obviously it would be good if the more input I have to that, the better. Do you want any thoughts on that, Paul? Yeah.
Well, I guess it's in our sort of chairs briefing. I mean, probably one of the most significant things, items that's been delegated to this committee from full council is the adoption and approval of the statement of accounts. So obviously this group are the only group that gets to scrutinise and ask questions on those accounts in any detail. So I would certainly say that is one aspect that you should focus on. Obviously, it's not for me to write the report because it's the effectiveness of those scrutiny, my team and colleagues around the table. But obviously, to date, we've had fairly good feedback from the external auditor in terms of value for money and all those other aspects. And I think today is just further evidence. There's been some really good challenge scrutiny and some really good questions, even on some of the most mundane of reports, like the statement of accounting policies. But
Okay, thanks, Paul. So, as I say, I will David, some thoughts.
I mean, what you could say is the what we've done, what we've heard from. You can effectively give a summary of the things that we've cast our eye over. I imagine the the amount of money, the top line headlines from counter fraud work would be quite a nice thing to include for everybody to show what the council is actually, or what's being done on that part of the council. Again, the internal audit work to show where we've looked at that. You could then remind all members that they need to sort out their expenses and produce VAT receipts and everything, rather than
I'm sure the council would be delighted to hear that.
this cohort. But the general thing is, how much have you done? How well have you done it? And have you made anyone's life any better? And I guess, you know, if you look at the money we've saved, we've been able to use that to make people's lives better. So there you go. That's one way of looking at it.
Yeah, good. Thanks for that. I mean, you wouldn't think of doing one from licensing, though, would you? For instance, would you do an annual report from licensing?
Well, if you wanted to, you could look at how many cases were. You effectively could say what you've done. So you would say how many licensing applications did the council process in municipal year, whatever. How many of each type? What came to committee? How many were appealed? How many were successfully appealed? And you could do the same metrics for planning if you wanted to. You know, what you did, how well you did it, et cetera, et cetera. You know, just like we do with how many complaints we get, how many FOIs we do. You can at least measure it.
I'll stop trying to get it.
Yeah, you might want to, Chair, because I believe the SIP for Guidance on Audit Committee's best practice says that you ought to write an annual report to the full council.